Have they done the haunting of Bly Manor yet, where they put
Oh, goodness. No, but they did do the haunting of Millhouse, so I think that you should follow that up with a meme. It's meme time.
How's it going, Reject Nation? G and J here today. We are going to talk about the follow-up to Haunting of Hill House Q&A review style, basically where we take the questions from you guys that we put on our community page and Patreon post. You guys are basically guiding the review. You're driving the review, so you guys are involved with us as well. Engagement with the audience.
Ha ha ha.
It's called The Haunting of Bly Manor, by the way. I haven't mentioned that yet, but let's just swing into action here. So our first question that we got comes from Horror and Gamer, and he just says, I feel like this is a good opener for a review like this. Out of 10, 0 out of 10. I personally think I would probably rate this as a quick summary review, non-spoilers right now. I would say probably somewhere between 8.5 to a 9 out of 10 for me. I rank it pretty high. I ended up loving it. The first 4 episodes, I was like, I like it. The some of the scary stuff feels a little bit tacked on or forced, like it didn't seem interested in it. But then by the time I got to episode 5, everything started clicking a lot better for me. The scary and tension moments started feeling a lot more natural. They weren't like overly abundant. By the end of the story, I was very much moved. I thought it was rather beautifully told. And I love the performances, the direction I don't find as strong as Haunting of Hill House necessarily, but it is a very different show than the first season overall. Yeah, I would probably give it like 8.5 to 9. I think it's wonderfully crafted and overall haunting and beautiful.
Yeah, I think in terms of number rating, I'm probably right there alongside you. This is, it's fresh in my mind, so part of me wonders if it's just the sheen of a new season, but I did feel a lot of differences from the first season that I do think are quality that this season has. And yeah, while some of the more overt horror elements are dialed back a bit, I thought it was incredibly well directed, performed, written, and yeah, it made up for, I guess, if you want to call it a lack of, overt scares with things that were surreal and unsettling and twisted. And it's tough to, I think, follow up such an involved character study gothic ghost story with another involved character study gothic ghost story that manages to feel different and like its own thing, and still akin in the right ways. And I thought this really nailed that. I thought they changed the format enough to make it kind of neat and interesting again from the first season, which had a really specific format, just really gracefully told the stories. So I didn't mind at all that the horror was a little dialed back.
This is the most John and I have talked about the show together.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually getting John's actual opinion here. We haven't discussed this. Yeah, thanks for the question, Horror Gamer.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Muchas
and then
gracias.
I chose this for number 2. Originally, I wanted to save a question like this for last, but I actually think this seems to be one of the main discussions that either falls under like the why people might be disappointed category or why people might not be as responsive to this season as they were with Haunting of Hill House. So Bradley Butso over at Patreon asked, how would you guys compare the scares of Bly Manor to those of Hill House? Haunting of Hill House has one of the most memorable jump scares I've ever experienced in my entire life. That was, I believe, the penultimate episode when, what's the actress's name? Victoria Pedretti, as a ghost comes out
Of the back seat when the two other sisters are arguing. Yeah.
And there's not a single scare here that comes near the level of that. And I'll also add that there's no reveal or shock moment in this season that compares to the reveal of the Betneck lady in Haunting of Hill House. There's a couple of spooky moments. I felt anything with the Lady of the Lake before we got her backstory, those were some of the scariest moments to me. As a matter of fact, kind of a reversal moment would have to be the third to last episode when it ends where Victoria is trying to get or not Danny, we'll call her the character name, Danny is trying to get Flora out of the house and she turns and the Lady of the Lake's there, grabs her by the throat and just starts dragging. Like that was actually a really scary moment to me. And also when you're looking at the Lady of the Lake's backstory, and I thought there was a really clever one where
when her sister finds the dress and then her hands pop out.
Yeah.
That I think was the one that bordered for me on like the memorable jump scare
Yeah.
of the season, because it's in such a legitimized character moment that it felt very well earned, but also it comes out of nowhere and it makes you jump.
But at the same time, though, as you asked this question, because I got the questions, but I haven't written anything down or made any notes. So as we're doing this, is a very on the fly kind of. I'm wearing a fly shirt. It's a very on the fly response, and I still had to find myself racking my brain as I was reading your question out loud. Whereas Haunting of Hill House, I'm like, no, I still remember that. That's like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
To kind of piggyback off of your question a little bit more, this is such a different season, and I feel like the penultimate episode where you get the Lady of the Lake story, I think, tonally, especially when you're going to dive into that backstory, I felt like they were trying to strike a mood and tone where every episode could feel part of the same season, part of the same show, especially if you're going to do something like that of the Lady of the Lake. And this is definitely more of a gothic romance. And it's a ghost story. It's a ghost story and a gothic romance at the same time. Yeah. But it's definitely nowhere near as scary. Like, the scares feel kind of limited to me. It's in the first 4 episodes, it started feeling like, oh crap, it's starting to feel like a Netflix show with the scares, in the sense of the scary thing happens in the last 5 minutes. And then we have a cliffhanger so you can watch the next episode. And sometimes the ones that were sprinkled in within then this was really just the first 4 episodes where I was feeling this. Sometimes some of the scary stuff sprinkled in throughout the first 4, especially with Danny being haunted by Eddie, the Kevin from Sin City,
the anime Doom glasses or whatever that is.
That was like, it's not very. There's something about it. I was starting to get the impression that the show's not interested in being scary, but they have to have some scares.
I got the sense that it wasn't necessarily this show's bread and butter, especially in this season, to do those very kind of popular Conjuring-esque. I feel like The Conjuring has had a certain level of influence where anything ghostly and gothic has to have a certain level of these jump scares. Yeah, I mean, as a lot of people and we have said, I think Bly Manor definitely is less overtly scary than Hill House. I mean, Hill House, there's still ghosts peppered all around in the background and stuff of Bly Manor, but Hill House seemed to want to torment you a little bit more with those, and was also playing with kids who are frightened of these beings that are, not necessarily the same as, here's a specific person who lived in our house, especially when her her fiance steps out of the car and gets hit by the horror movie truck, the horror movie garbage truck that comes out of nowhere. Like, that was a moment where I was kind of taken out by the jump scare, because
You're gonna go,
no, I mean, like, I felt for the scene, certainly, but
I was distracted by how they tried to make the glasses look like the ghost.
Yeah,
when the truck's coming on and are like, see, that's why.
And that was the thing, is that in those particular moments, and not always, but that's a good example of one where the jump scare started to teeter into a place where I could also just really feel all the effects and filmmaking that went into this set piece, and then it stopped feeling like a chilling presence that happened to have been there, or some kind of really truly random event.
Well, it seemed to have the Mike Flanagan stamp throughout, even though he didn't direct and write every episode. But I think what was missing more than anything, or the presence that I think was not really carried over as strongly as the first season, was the cinematography. And I think that guy's just too busy directing sequels to All the Boys I've Loved or something. Yeah. I think that's what he's doing, right? I haven't looked at him in a while, but I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me correctly.
He's got those Noah Centineo fish to fry, or whoever's in those movies.
When comparing it to Hill House, you have similar things, like everything you listed, and they do have a haunted house, and they deal with, themes of grief primarily, and that's what the ghosts really represent. And the haunting, to me, even the haunting of Hill House is not that scary. It's definitely scarier than this.
Yeah.
This one is more about like the haunting from, within the soul. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I like that approach. While it's a different kind of scary. It's, it leans more into the psychological angle. Yeah, there's a lot of ghosts, but there's something about it that feels more. That's what it is. It feels a little more fairy tale in this season.
Yeah, and I think there is a certain difference in quality that I do appreciate. Actually, I appreciate this about Bly Manor is instead of going bigger, like doing a Conjuring 2 and putting even more craziness inside, I think toning it down and focusing it a little more inward, or at least on a smaller spectrum of characters, helps, because I think this season is more focused on chilling you, getting under your skin, and really kind of planting all these icky little details that are going to get unwound later. And like it's funny because it has a lot of devices the first season has. It's jumping back and forth in time, and it's revealing information through flashbacks at very strategic points. But the first season, or I should say Hill House, felt like, a gothic family saga, family drama, and every episode has a different character as its sole focus. And this one does in its own way as well, but there's a lot more crossover, whereas I felt like in Hill House, you got this character's episode, and here's all the scary shit that happened to them, and then this character's episode, and all the scary shit that happened to them, and even though it is shared, there's a lot more individual stuff in the first season, whereas this felt like a bunch of people stuck in this one place.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was about the souls trapped at Bly Manor because of the Lady of the Lake's anger or rage and whatever, right?
Just unwillingness to let go.
So yeah, whereas Hill House is, every, like you said, every family member. This is not everyone here is blood related. It's more about like covering the ghosts that are trapped here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still like Hill House more. However, it is one of those things that while there's similarities and while they use some of the same music and such, it's so different that it's really easy for me to just look at it as its own thing and not really compare it. And I'm not just saying that to be, like pretentious, cool reviewer.
Yeah.
I am that. I'm talking more in the sense of after the first episode, I wasn't even comparing it. It was like, this is a very different show.
Yeah. And I think that's really smart.
Well, the thing I think helped me though, is I read enough little opinions that really prep me for that. Whereas if I had just binged Hill House and then I went into this, I probably would have been taken aback. But I read enough people who were like, it's not scary, it's more gothic romance, it's more drama. Everyone was preparing my mindset for that. So I was able to go in and just accept it.
I think that the ultimate distinction for me is I think that Hill House is perhaps a more like impressive season because there's so much juggling and it has such a nifty way of organizing its events and it has such an organizational structure, and there's that episode that's like all one shot, whereas this one seemed like it toned down some of that stuff. It maybe got a little out of your face in some of the direction sides and in some of the juggling it was trying to do, and I thought that made the experience just take on a different life, and pretty soon I too was not thinking about it.
I think though that the voice of this show feels from a much earlier century, whereas Hill House has a very modern day sensibility. So I think it's easier just to connect and relate, whereas this has more of a novella vibe to it, But anyway, thanks. Had to get that out of the way because I know that's what most people have been doing online.
Yeah.
And then Lewis is your patron asks us, how many of the Easter egg ghosts did you catch? I caught a lot of them. I think I was literally always analyze the frame looking for anything vaguely human shaped. I watched this with Olivia and she caught so much. Like so much more than I did. I caught a good amount. Around episode 6, I think I stopped looking because it became a little challenging to fully pay attention to the show for me when I'm so caught up in looking in the background of things. And as I'm like paying attention to so many things at once now. But I did catch we probably in total caught around, not a lot. I want to say somewhere between 10 to 15. Not a lot. Okay. That's the difference with this, is because I know for Haunting of Hill House, people discovered that, down the road. Whereas here, sometimes it was a little bit more obvious. I don't know if it's just because I was actually looking for it this time.
Yeah.
That there were times where I'm like, well, it's clearly there. Look at it. It's like right there. This would have ruined doing reactions for the show because I stopped looking because the first 3 episodes of watching this were a lot of, who's that a ghost? Who's that a ghost? Pause it. Rewind it. Hit pause it. that's a ghost. Or, no, that's not a ghost. You know?
Nope, it's just a reflection.
So I was like, I want to finish the show.
That's us staring into the screen too hard. Never mind.
So yeah, we did that so many times, especially the first 3 episodes. I felt like they were more littered in the first 4 episodes. And I'm sure they were there throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, around episode 5 or 6, I wasn't really looking for it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is I went into this season and I knew about it during the first season, but I had much the same experience this time where I had it in my mind of like, okay, because, like this show, even with a slightly more restrained directing style is very beautiful to look at. There's so many great shots to drink. I actually didn't find that many on this first watch because
really?
I just kept getting sucked into the show and I think I kept having that in the back of my mind is like, it's fun and I'm going to keep my eyes peeled, but I'm not going to try too hard because I know that I'm going to end up rewinding every 10 minutes just to catch what I missed while looking for stuff. So yeah, I feel kind of like a failure because I didn't catch very many. Well, that's the thing is they know too, so they're getting clever at being like, here's a big wide shot. Have fun.
They would have more fun with it in the sense sometime. I remember I think it was the first or second episode where Danny is leaning over talking to Flora outside, and then whenever it cut back to Danny's shot, sometimes the ghost would be there in that same exact frame, same shot. Cut to Danny, cut to Flora, cut to Danny, cut to Flora. And every other shot of Danny, the ghost would be there in the background. Sometimes obscured, sometimes more obvious. What I thought was fun about doing it this time was the first time I watched Haunting of Hill House, the only time I've seen Haunting of Hill House, I never spotted a ghost. Never did.
Not even the ones that were supposed to be there right in the frame. Yeah. Not even the jump scares.
But Bly Manor, what was fun about that was uncovering what those shapes were as the show progressed. We were like, oh, that's the doctor right there. Things like that. The doctor from the Lady of the Lake story.
And how they correspond to the dolls and things like that.
That was real. That was the most fun part to me, was like putting those pieces together. And that's another thing about the show that I think they succeeded at too, was setting up their mysteries and questions and letting the unraveling happen. I thought was always a blast. But thanks, Lewis. The MHA asks us, is this story a ghost story or gothic romance to you? Well,
yes.
It's both. It's undoubtedly both. I think what you want to say is it a horror show? I would say no, not really. It's a weird thing where it's a ghost story and gothic romance that feels a little bit detached from being a full-on horror show. I think it's equally both because it's kind of cyclical in the sense of ghost story and gothic romance. They definitely feed into each other from beginning to end, right to its closing shot, and I love that approach. I don't really consider the first one a gothic romance.
It's super gothic, but yeah, the romantic elements are more side quests than the point.
Yeah.
Whereas this season seems to very much hone in on romances of like the stories being told at a wedding.
I mean, you have Hannah and Owen, story being told at the wedding. You have Jamie and Danny,
and Peter and Ms. Jessel, and
Rebecca. You have that. So you have all these different romantic stories that are, and even the Lady of the Lake. You know, like that.
Exactly.
Her and her husband. Every story was so tied into gothic romance, but it also bred ghosts out of it. The stories of not moving on and grief, it all tied in together in a neatly wrapped package for me. Yeah, it's definitely more. I think it's equally both of these.
Yeah, and I
think the issue that audiences are having who are not liking it is it's not a horror show.
I'm flashing right back to Crimson Peak, which I mean, Crimson Peak is more overtly
this
horror.
Is a better show than Crimson Peak.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, I agree. The first season I think is very gothic. Both of these seasons are very gothic in their style, their storytelling, the traditions that they're pulling from. And this season, I would just say, is full-on gothic romance, because gothic romance often just includes a ghost story. It's the difference of what the ghosts are for, really. And so, whereas the first season, a lot of the ghost activity is based in anguish and trauma, and it is the same so here, but with a more heartbroken, an element based in human attachments or lack thereof. So I feel like because love is at the core of so much of this season, I'd say that this one is, definitely gothic romance, whereas the first season I'd just say is just, a gothic ghost story.
Yeah.
But because, I mean, the nature of so much gothic ghost storytelling in the first place is all about, unrequited loves and, unfinished business and despair and people lingering. It's all about these broken relationships and whatnot. And so, it's very tonal and it's very moody. And I thought that, again, I feel like that is a legitimate avenue of horror that doesn't get respect or doesn't get considered horror just because it doesn't rely as heavily on in-your-face, ghoulish jump scaring. But really, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not horror still, because all the tones are anguished tones, fraught tones. It's a show painting in the kind of horrors of life, whether those be the heartbreak variety or the murderous variety.
Yeah, absolutely. Riley Burgess, thank you for the question, is asking us, favorite love story of the season? Also thoughts on the wedding scenes in the final episode. That was fun to put together in the wedding scene. Mm-hmm. Because I did have a thought by episode 5 or 6 where I was like, wait a minute. So Carla Gugino just started telling this story, and how is she telling this story? Is she like, how confused are the people listening?
Yeah,
to this? Like the amount of time jumping that are happening.
Well,
and like I thought this was gonna be like a half hour most. We've been sitting here at this party for the last.
Well,
it's getting busy with the traffic right now. We got to hit the road.
And they acknowledged that, and I couldn't help but wonder when she said, like, I told you it was a long story, and I'm like, do you mean like 7 hours, like a TV show like this?
Yeah.
Or was it like an hour in show time?
But like, what was your narrative structure to telling this? And how do you know all of this? That was probably one of the confusing parts to me too. How do you know everything?
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, and I'm not an expert on the turning of the screw, which this is based on, but I know that a big part of that story's, legacy is the fact that the narrator is, you're wondering, are these things that she might have witnessed, or are these just delusions of a, insane mind gone mad of trauma, or something like that, which again is a very gothic thing to do.
I mean, I like the reveal of knowing who was at the wedding. I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
And also like tying it back because it was a bit of a bummer when you first learned that, like, oh, Flora and Miles, is it?
Miles, yeah.
Miles, they're forgetting what happened at Bly Manor. They're forgetting the sacrifice that Danny made, which was a real, like, that was heartbreaking to me. Yes, they get to live on and have happy lives and get away from the traumatic upbringing they had. And I'm like, man, but Danny, like, was gonna fucking die because she sacrificed herself for you guys.
She sacrificed herself. Yeah.
So to have that story, be told to Flora and Miles, for them to hear it again, I thought was powerful, and also it was fun just seeing like everyone who was there, and it's like final moments. I thought was really great. It's kind of the summation of the whole point of the show.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it
carry them with us,
and that is again another one of those things that I think is very beautiful and pretty gothic, as well as you come out with this bittersweetness of, it is, I guess, a happy ending that they don't have to become the Hill House family and live with this trauma dictating their life. But at the same time, in a show about people's memories being forgotten partly and being manipulated and distorted, that is heartbreaking for Danny, who is the emotional core of the entire season,
My favorite love story was easily, Rebecca and
Danny
and Peter.
Oh, Rebecca and Peter.
Yeah, Rebecca and Peter for sure.
Yeah.
Because Peter just seemed like such a good guy, and Rebecca just seemed like such a smart person. What is up with Oliver Jackson Cohen being horrible people lately?
Well, he's
such a horrible person.
He got his redemption arc in the first Hill House season, and that's about enough of that.
That was probably the scariest scene to me, when he was jealous after Owen gave.
Oh God, the batter!
I had to try the batter.
The batter in your mouth.
He's gonna murder.
Yeah.
Murder.
I thought something, more overtly savage would happen out of that.
I thought they did a great job with his character though, because I hated him, and then you start to understand him much later in the season.
Yeah.
When he keeps going through his little all-time high. Like he becomes like very vulnerable and sensitive, especially when he's dead.
Yes.
You know? Like him as a ghost was much more endearing. You feel much more pity for him.
Yeah.
And the way they handle that romance of like trying to get him out of Bly Manor, how it like totally messed with Rebecca, that whole thing with possessing her, you know, you have that thought right. I'm like, oh, he's gonna kill her, isn't he? He's gonna kill her while possessing her. This is so messed up. This is so messed up. And it's not my favorite. I was joking about that. It's not my favorite. We don't really get a resolve on them, do we? Now that I think about it, they're the one we don't really get resolution on.
I guess
They just gotta get the hell out of Bly Manor now.
I guess they just dissipate or they move on to the next realm or something. Yeah. I really enjoyed the way the season did, and that's the credit to the writing of both of these seasons, is the amount of perspective you get to see all around. And yeah, you find yourself understanding why everybody in the house does not trust or like this person, but you also see what she loves about him. And yeah, I found that very compelling. I think in terms of the romances, I think my favorite one, just personally, would have had to have been Hannah, and Owen, because you know they're such lovely characters, such lovely performers. You know, there's so much beauty and sadness there that you just want it to work so much. In terms of just like my own, you know, personal taste, I think that's the one for me. But I also thought that the Jamie and Danny, the way like and going back to season 1, Hill House, like when she falls in love with the doctor guy, like her love falling in arcs, she like are just like
she
amazing.
is so good at falling in love.
She's so good at falling in love on screen. Like I really was touched by all of theirs. So you know,
I mean, I don't want to spoil an upcoming answer for a question. My personal favorite one, because I agree. I mean, I was very much endeared by the romance between Hannah and Owen, especially in the end of episode 5 when she's realizing she's dead. She's like, no, I'll go to Paris with you. Come back. And like that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I went to bed
heartbroken.
And
I had a terrible dream.
That like shook me. That felt like something was being ripped out of me because Hannah was that whole storyline in episode 5. It's funny how the season 1's the bent neck lady was the standout episode in most people's eyes, and I feel like episode 5 with Hannah is, because I think that was also episode 5, bent neck lady, and Hannah's episode 5 is also the standout for a lot of people too. You know?
Yeah.
So there's something about their episode 5s where they're like, we got to nail it on this one.
Get that mid-season
this is the one
boy.
right here. Yeah.
This is the point people will get to before they decide whether or not to switch off or keep going.
Yeah, because I was really endeared by that, but the one that was really just bringing me, you know, an occasional tear of joy where I was so moved by the romance was definitely a Danny and Jamie. It didn't seem obvious. Like once it started getting close to the part where she puts her hand on her and like wants to kiss her.
Yeah.
And Jamie's like, who would have thought?
Good to know. Or whatever. Yeah. Whatever that little line is.
Who would have known? Yeah. Whatever that cute little line is. Like a little bit before that. It's not the kind of thing, at least for me, I wasn't watching it going, oh, they're going to hook up. That's totally, they're setting up a total romance between them. It was unexpected, but felt natural that it happened, especially in the final episode where you're seeing the life that they get to have together. I thought was just absolutely beautiful. I was so touched by it, and I forget what moment it was that made me cry in their romance. There was something.
There were
there.
A few.
Like it was their romance that made me cry a good amount of times. I was so touched by it, especially like them learning to be vulnerable with each other. They grow when they're together. It's like an empowering relationship. It really is. It's empowering because that's like a relationship of two individuals who grow as individuals but are stronger as a unit. The final episode with them, as much exposition as there was, as much as they were like, we gotta wrap this shit up.
Yeah. We got a prologue to get through.
This whole episode's just one big prologue. We gotta wrap up. As much as there was a lot of that, I still found myself incredibly moved, and my like when she finds Danny underwater and she's like crying, screaming underwater.
You me us.
That whoops, I'm feeling it right now.
It was really beautiful, and I think that, you know, it's like there are LGBT aspects of the first season that are a bit more easily from the outside viewed as pulpy, I think, and this was an example of
so much hotter in the first season.
Well, but no, I mean
repressed lesbian love.
There is a certain amount of, and it's, I think
what I loved about it too. Also, sorry to cut you off here. I have to interrupt. I thought it was going to be something with Danny. They had hints in the flashback later after you discover that she's into Jamie. But when you're seeing the flashback of the wedding dress and the girl putting her hand on her body, you're like, oh, okay, so she's been attracted to women.
She's at least aware of these feelings. Yeah.
But I love how they didn't deal with anything of, like, I've never been with a girl. Like, there was nothing about being gay that was a discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear some actual gay people's thoughts on it, but it seems it didn't feel exploitative at all, really.
Did you know the gardener was actually going to be Oliver Jackson Cohen, and then they decided to cast a woman, and I think they just went with the script.
Oh, cool. But that's what you do. Like that is what you do, because it felt like a very natural love story between two people that had a lot of really, really well performed, because so much of the insecurity and the vulnerability is just in little performance ticks and little lines that don't seem important but are very important intentionally. Just those little things of, like, it's okay. Like those little reminders Jamie gives. They just felt, as a romance, I feel like, again, we just watched The Boys, and, like there's a lesbian romance that is discovered and then put like front and center for everybody. Yeah. And I feel like this show managed to really imbue it with just all the life and love that, resonates without being lurid about it at all,
Yeah, especially House of Victoria's, like when she's drawn, Danny is drawn to her. She has that like puppy dog.
Yeah. That very like, please love me too. Yeah. Love me back. I'll do anything. I'm here for you. I love you.
Such a sweet voice, but thank you. And then we have to answer this question coming from a man named Eric Horstman.
Oh, look out.
The man who's most passionate about this series, not just the season, the series.
Yeah, we better get a third season.
Just like Hill House, the whole season was amazing, but some episodes stand out. Which 3 episodes are your favorite and why? I think you picked my episodes.
I think you picked the episodes.
I'm looking at this. For me, they were 5, 8, and 9, though 4 and 7 were so good too. Maybe have to rethink this after a second watch. Yeah, undoubtedly 5.
5 for sure, yeah.
5 was like a Sopranos, and if you guys haven't seen the Sopranos, there's a lot of dream sequence episodes. That was like a Sopranos-like episode to me. I feel like most of us didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
But we wanted to stick around with this and find out, And I think that's a great way to hook an audience where you're like, I've been watching this for 40 minutes. I don't know what exactly is happening, but I know I'm learning stuff,
Yeah, and that's a very hard thing to do, and I really appreciate this show for doing it both times, but especially this time getting me to a point where I'm like, I am pretty sure I'm lost, but I think I'm supposed to be, so it's okay.
I mean, the thing with Hannah, though, they made it so obvious in the first episode. The first episode where she doesn't eat or drink, and because you're coming off of Hill House, you're like, oh, she's dead. Yeah. She's obviously dead.
Something's up.
Sometimes the ghost roles are confusing in this season, though, admittedly. Okay, so it's intentional when they can appear. Is it like Hannah is able to remain because she refuses to believe she's dead, so she's able to be present with them? But sometimes she seems like she's touching them. Because the other ghosts, they touch someone and they take over their bodies. With her, I'm trying to think of moments where I'm like, well, they look like they were physically interacting. And there was one scene I remember before that episode.
Coffee.
She's drinking coffee. And that's what was throwing me off when I was like, oh, maybe she's not dead. Because until that moment where she's drinking coffee, I was thinking, oh, she might be alive.
Yeah.
But then when this episode started, I was like, okay, she's clearly dead. And I think we're going to find out why. And then you're seeing the well thing. And Olivia's like, oh, she's down in the well. She's dead in the well,
Yeah.
The wall when she's at the church.
Yeah.
And you're,
the crack.
You're uncovering the information. Like the way that was crafted on a cinematic, directing, editing, performance level. Everything about that episode was undoubtedly the highlight. My second favorite episode is 8, where you get the Lady of the Lake story. Mm-hmm. That was the one I was kind of expecting to not be as intrigued by, but to me that was actually the scariest one, because you're like, there's something really fucked up about this girl.
Well, yeah, and there's it's a really distinct episode, and even though Katie Siegel is only in that one really prominently, she especially brings just this
she's scary.
Yeah, she's got this singularly driven but also kind of malevolent aura. Like she's so driven that it almost comes off as like this harsh passion.
Yeah.
And again, it's a very gothic thing, and it's showing you the echoes of all this. And I love that they put it in black and white.
Even the sister I thought was great. Like that was an unexpected turn. Like I love sometimes the narration was a little too much in some of these episodes, but I actually really love the moment where the sister kills Katie Siegel, the Lady of the Lake, because
that whole thing about mercy and enough.
That was a great narration touch, and you're like, oh yeah, she's been a bitch for a long time.
And even though they shared the same goal and drive, it seems like some kind of wedge has been driven that cannot be alleviated.
Yeah, and then it's like the sister's kind of seems like she's kind of worse in the end. Perdita, the sister, I thought was actually like, oh, you're kind of a worse person. Like she started off as a better person, and it seems like the circumstances and the situations devolved her, and ruined her morale. Yeah, and she became worse in the end than her sister.
Yeah, and it put her into this place of anguish brought on by like the guilt. There's this weird thing of like I needed some release, but also now I'm just going to be tormented until I die.
I think what's great about episode 8 is that it's the only one it's kind of like its own short film that's put into this season.
Yeah.
Because you're not cutting in and out of present time. They hop you into that time. You're just there until that story's complete. So it's like this own isolated episode that also explains majority of the season.
It shows you why all this was possible. And I think that episode kind of is to solidify what I guess, I don't feel like rules is exactly the right word here, but it does kind of solidify the nature of the haunting. And I like that they went with a different nature than Hill House. And I mean, obviously that probably comes with the source material, but just having it seemed to me, just from what I know about ghost stories from hearing so many over the years, is that is one of those ideas in the lore, is that somebody just will not let go to the point that their energy just calcifies and just becomes this presence that infects a place. And then that's where so many ghost stories come from, and I thought they realized that really well and then used that forward, creating this gravity well. I thought was a great metaphor.
I would actually have to say episode 7. That's the one where Danny's tied up, and then their kids are interacting with Rebecca and Peter. And like that episode to me was the most tense episode. 9 I was the most moved by, but I really did think it was starting to feel rushed at a good portion of it. I was moved to tears in that one, and I was very much touched by I really loved I loved 9, but I really see its flaws. Whereas episode 7 for me was the one that I thought this is not scary, but it's certainly intense. Like I'm very much like, what's gonna happen? Especially with the desperation on everyone in that whole scene. It's little Reservoir Dogs attic scene.
It's funny that certain episodes that take side characters who have a very distinct presence because of whatever perspective we've seen up until this point, they take the focus of an episode and then become a whole other experience for you. Because watching as Peter and Rebecca try and figure this out, and watching the hurt and betrayal that comes out through Rebecca because of what Peter is desperately doing. And I love those beats about like no one should ever ask for this much help. You see again these lost souls, and I thought that was the most challenging, because it even does make you like the whole thing with Peter's hell and everything I thought was great too, because it's it's again showing just all the layers of anguish that contribute to this.
And I love the touch too of how Rebecca does not inhabit Flora, because Rebecca, I'm surprised we haven't made one perfectly splendid joke this whole time, because when Rebecca was about to inhabit Flora, on a personal level, I was thinking, come on, man, haven't you been manipulated by this guy enough? You're dead because of him. Like, give me a break. You're really going to give into this? And then to have that reveal, oh, thank God. And now she's grown, and now she's moved past I keep calling Peter Patrick. I keep
Peter.
He just reminds me a bit of a Bateman vibe, I guess.
Yeah.
Everyone's motivations and everything just started clicking in a real natural way. Little subtle moments like, do you want to end up like her? And he pulls Perdita's body forward and like faceless. Like everyone's motivations and the whole purpose of it all just started making a lot of sense. The dream sequence stuff, I think, might confuse people. Like Olivia and I, when we were watching, we're kind of going back and forth. So I was under the impression that when the ghosts inhabit the body of a living person, the living person gets trapped in their own memories and subconscious.
They kind of bump you in there while they take the wheel for as long as they can.
And then the living person learns to dream hop. So I think some people might have thought like Flora and Miles were dead. So I think this might be confusing people. And then, like I said, some of the rules with Hannah were a little confusing. I like the way they handle the dream sequence stuff. How it's always unless it's like they're repeating the same memory again. Usually when they're thrown back in the memory, they're reliving it, and then it takes them a moment to realize, like, oh, wait a minute.
Wait, we've done this before.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be 5 years old. What's going on here? Yeah, and I mean, that stuff is confusing, and I think for good reason, partly because confusing things are unsettling. But I did ultimately not have too much of an issue, partly because with Hannah, that's another one of those, again, gothic things. It's almost similar to The Lady of the Lake in a way. She's so concerned with and dedicated to upkeeping this place that she sort of bonded her soul here, as, you know, helped along by the gravity well that is Bly Manor. At least in that sense, there were moments where they would also acknowledge the pass-through versus the, you know, concrete touchability of the ghosts, and I feel like perhaps there's not really anything explained, but it seemed like there is kind of different levels of corporeality, if that makes any sense. Like sometimes they're walking through each other, but it seems like sometimes the ghosts, when concentrated enough or in the right situation, can actually interact with things.
Yeah.
So just having those ideas in the back of my head made it easier not to get too hung up on those things. And yeah, as for the lore in general, it's often said, and they even touch on it in the show, that children have just a different ability to perceive these things. They're not, you know, as sculpted and blinded by, you know, all the various aspects of growing up. So, you know, that's another gothic trope that I think works. You know, it's because kids are, you know, tricky to understand sometimes. And I kind of took it as that. If someone's being possessed, they're pushed into a memory, you know, until they're kind of jumped back in for whatever reason, whether that be the connection, you know, fading or whatever. I kind of came to view, you know, because of Insidious now, like astral travel, astral projection, the astral plane is more of a well-known concept. So I feel like because dreams are said to exist there and ghosts and spirits and whatnot kind of interface with or occupy that plane, it sort of made sense to me that perhaps, yeah, these echoes of people's souls that are littered all over this manor, you know, if you're in some kind of dream state and you know how to access the astral plane in some way, shape, or form, like these children do, you know, it ultimately kind of came together in this casserole of like, I buy this, you know, like this for even though it doesn't do like a specific rules dump, and I can certainly see why people would find it just confusing to the point of being frustrating. With all of these gothic themes in play, I thought it worked pretty well for me.
Yeah.
And I thought it tied itself together pretty well in those respects. And I mean, also too, the first episode came up and the second Miles, there were a couple things Miles did where I was just sitting there going, he's got to be possessed by like an older man. There's no way. Like there's got to be some possession element. And I like that they unpacked that a little too, as opposed to the first season.
I think the possession element's cool because he's not like fully possessed. Like,
it's not demons.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like he can hop in and out. So sometimes he's Miles and sometimes he's not. So I think that makes for even more tricky mystery to unpack. Let's move on to the last question we have for today. I know we've had a few more, but you know we're
getting long.
Yeah.
Getting long.
The last question. This one comes again from Horror and Gamer. Full circle here.
Hey.
He actually had his question stacked, and then this one to me I thought would be a good chance to just talk about the cast. He said, who stood out the most? My personal favorite from the ones who stood out the most would have to be, for me personally, it was whoever played Hannah. Tania Miller. I see her name right here. Tania Miller. Her and actually Owen, both of them were the ones that stood out to me the most.
I really love
them. It was the new players, Jamie, like those three were the ones who actually left me with the biggest impact.
Greg Sestero from The Room.
Yeah.
He was great in those couple scenes of the wedding.
They all brought so much depth, but Hannah had this strange aura of politeness, yet, you know, like longing for more, but reserved and very caring, but wears her heart on her sleeve, but also can be shy. She also felt very strong. Like, I thought she might be the hero of the show by the time we got there. I actually wasn't expecting Danny to be the ultimate hero. Owen was just, he's just so unbelievably charming and sympathetic
and witty
and funny, you know?
Yeah.
And Jamie, you know, kind of has that like sarcastic, repressed, tough girl edge to her. They were the ones who really stood out to me a lot, like the new players especially. I thought everyone's great, though. To make it very blunt, everyone is great. You know, Victoria Pedretti as Danny,
dude.
Like, man, this girl can act. Like, from
oh my goodness,
from Hill House to here, like transformation, very different characters. Oliver Jackson Cohen, I feel like that's where you and I kind of have slight. I think his performance is solid.
Yeah.
I was distracted by his accent. It didn't sound. Not that I hang out with like Scottish people or been to Scotland, but there was something about his voice. I'm like, this doesn't sound. I don't feel like this is your real voice. And then I was thinking, like, I've never heard interviews with the guy. This might be his real voice, but it doesn't sound like his real voice. Then I'm like, oh, he's actually British. After I finished watching the show, I had to find out.
Yeah.
But you said your accent didn't. That's one of the few things John and I talked about. Like, the accent for him didn't bother you.
No, I'd be very curious as to what people over the pond have to say about this, because there are a lot of Americans doing various UK accents, and there are also, you know, actors from the UK doing other accents. And so I got to imagine if you're British, maybe some of these are a little hard to listen to. But I actually thought that generally speaking, the accent work was pretty good across the board, at least for the people who I know aren't of that native accent.
Oliver Jackson Cohen's I really started to buy when he was a goat. For some reason around that point, the voice was no longer a distraction for me.
When he's breaking down and he's not putting the charm on so much, and he's kind of in a more vulnerable state.
Yeah, there was something about the voice then that felt more natural to me. And I feel like I'm probably way in the minority on that when it comes to him. I accept that, okay? It's just my opinion. Carla Gugino had a very fascinating accent. I thought Carla Gugino's narration was good.
Yeah.
I think she was a little distracting in voice at first. Then I'm like, but it kind of fits with the tone of what I hear this show's going for, so it was easy for me to latch onto. But then when you find out who she is, it was a bit of a How I Met Your Mother situation for me.
See, I was
How
sitting
did
there
Jamie
half the show
evolve
guessing.
into Carla Gugino? Like,
that's fair. That's a fair.
Nothing. They don't seem to resemble each other in any way. Not just in terms of physical appearance, but everything about the way Carla Gugino talks, carries herself. I get that Jamie, the character, will have grown and from all the pain and matured, all these things. Yet I couldn't really see the connection. I couldn't see that invisible line that makes them tied together.
Yeah, I'll give you that. And I mean, and it didn't bother me as much with the kids and whatnot, but there were moments where, especially later on with Miles, I was like, he's doing a good, like, adult male, but he doesn't really seem like the exact same character as Peter or something like that. And not that, you know, it's the same concept, but I can see where you're coming from. It didn't bother me so much, but I think that's a fair criticism because, you know, Jamie is such a specific character by the time you get to the end.
Carla Gugino's version seems like so proper.
Yeah,
and like you might get the sense that she's probably born into wealth or something, right? Like that's kind of the way she comes across. Jamie's like, you know, rough around the edges, tough sharpshooter, you know.
The only thing I could say is maybe it's because of the where she is and the fact that she knows some of these people are the people she's talking about. Maybe there's like a reserve there. Again, being that you only see Carla Gugino twice at the very beginning and very end, after an episode that does the most of just watching Jamie and Danny grow together, you know, I can see why that would be distracting a bit.
Henry Thomas as Henry Wingrave. I gotta say, man,
it goes way past ET for this guy.
Way past ET shit, man. This guy's trying to get out of the ET image for so long now.
Elliot. No, he's great.
He is awesome in this. You get the exact opposite effect, where I thought, if you tell me on paper, if like Oliver Jackson Cohen and him are doing accents, I'm more likely to believe I'll instantly buy Oliver Jackson Cohen over Henry Thomas. But Henry Thomas really seems like a British dude.
Yeah, that was. I kept going in, and these days, you know, I've just become conditioned to be a little wary of. Oh, we got a lot of accents going. Let's see how this goes. But yeah, more often than not, I found myself being like, "That's pretty good." He seems like a stately, rich British guy.
Yeah,
you know.
And learning his backstory was. Man, everyone's just so messed up in this show. Everyone's messed up. They're all messed up people.
Well, that's the thing. I think those are the keys to Gothic horrors. It's all about these sides of life, these sort of traumatic, emotional experiences that linger and haunt.
Well, what I think, like his performance, I think is a good representation of kind of what the show does as a whole. Is you present the surface, whether it be something that is instantly immediate, like on first thought, is like scary, or this person's an asshole, this person's bad, and then you pull back the curtain and you start unraveling why they are the way they are.
And why whose perspective made you think a certain way about them at first or whatever.
Yeah, and I think with Henry Thomas's portrayal, that especially comes hand in hand. I actually really liked his performance as the alter ego of himself too. Like that perfect smile that like you could just imagine an interview with Henry Thomas. Like, I really had to think about the smile. You can really feel that actor choice with that.
Yeah. I spent hours in front of the mirror smiling.
but that was fun to watch. And the birth of that alter ego, I thought, was powerful. I mean, at first, you're dealing with ghosts, now you're dealing with, like, schizophrenia.
Yeah, and I mean, it's that, you're dealing with personifications of various degrees, and I think that's more of a stretch in terms of rules. Like, I could see that actually confusing people, because that is just a, aspect of himself that was created out of a certain series of traumas.
But how was he able to come back to life at the end? He was his neck was snapped, wasn't he, or suffocated? He was still dead.
He was being suffocated, and I think she just didn't do all the way.
But he was a ghost at one point.
Was he a ghost?
Yeah, he was certainly a ghost.
He was
at one
definitely
point.
dead.
Or was it like that Mark Ruffalo Reese Witherspoon movie where he's like he's somewhere between death and
it could be that. It could be that. His soul.
He's not fully dead.
His soul is in limbo right now. It's sort of got one foot in his body.
Yeah.
Clinging. I'd have to go back and rewatch that sequence again.
He was for sure dead, because when he was a ghost and he was looking at his body, I was like, oh, is he gonna save the day? Because he just showed up here at the right time.
Oh, I thought that was just the alter ego just kind of looking on and lingering with him.
Oh, really?
I thought that was the alter ego.
Damn the rules. They didn't make that clear, because they've had stuff where someone dies and they see their dead body. So that's what I thought we were looking at, where someone died. No, because
you might be right.
Because Hannah, as a ghost, ends up talking with Henry the ghost, saying like, tell Owen something. I forget what she says. And then Henry comes back.
Okay, I'm gonna go rewatch that. You might be right.
Last night.
Well, no, but there are two of him, and there have been two of them the whole time. And Hannah clearly is a ghost that can interact with anybody. Yeah. So I was like, I don't know, maybe But if he was knocked out, and there are three Henrys.
there were 3 Henrys.
All right, then I'm gonna go back. I thought it was the alter ego, but that was maybe my misreading of the situation.
And then you have, like, the kids are great. They felt like real kids.
Yeah, and I thought it was very handy the way they did the possession thing to alleviate the certain moments where you're always going to run into like kids not talking like kids, and I thought that made it feel more natural.
But the one who I feel like Flora probably has like the highlight lines, especially that perfectly splendid thing. She is great. She's very charming. But Miles in particular, I thought having this like child who's grieving and then having to sort of bounce back and forth between being possessed and when not possessed, and especially when he is possessed, like the 7th episode, he doesn't seem like a kid playing an adult. I'm like, no, he seems like he's an adult.
Yeah, exactly. He's just carrying. That was why so many of his interactions with Danny are so unnerving, because I was like, just a kid should not do that.
Yeah.
And I loved, like there were times where I was like, man, I hate this kid. He's really easy to hate. Not like he's doing a bad job, but just like, I'm really creeped out. But I thought the more they showed you the other side, especially once they made it very clear what was happening, he did feel like a different kid when he was just Miles. And especially when he's arguing with Peter about like, this doesn't feel right. Like, why are we doing this? I don't like it. Those were the moments where I really especially started to appreciate what that kid was doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gosh, Alex Esso. I met her one time at Jason Dolan's movie,
The Vanishing of Sydney
That's
Hall.
What's called.
Out now.
She was there.
Stream it.
She was there. She's a very nice person. And then worked with her once.
Couple times, yeah.
Yeah, or
on
something.
some little
I
like
forget.
Fangoria type things, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't really like know her. We don't like talk to her on the regular or something like that, you know.
We're Instagram friends.
Yeah, that's about as far as our like what the definition of a friendship.
I could
with us
remind her where
goes.
we've met before.
Yeah, she's in Doctor Sleep, and then she's back here in this role as Charlotte Wingrave, the one who's sleeping with Henry. I remember when I met her, I wasn't aware of Starry Eyes or all her other horror movies that she's done, where she's actually like. I remember like people were kind of coming up to her and I had no idea who she was. And I remember like just talking to her, getting her because I'm like, oh, we're standing in the same circle. I was like, oh, where are you from? She's like, oh, Canada. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, so have you worked on anything so far? She's like, yeah, I've done a couple of movies and stuff. Like she's very just nonchalant about it. I'm like, that's crazy. So you just come from here to Canada and you just start like making work. That's awesome. Hopefully I'll be able to find out like, oh, she's got
She's hooked
got a
up.
growing reputation.
She is on top. She got that Mike Flanagan calling card.
When she first pops into the show, she is just, Charlotte Wingrave as this very traditional, proper English woman persona, right?
Very bright.
But then she has another layer in the story of tragic romance where she's having an affair, and her affair, in some ways, it's like it's not right, but it also kind of makes sense how it happened. It's sickening that it's with the brother. Her scene where the truth is coming out with her husband, I thought was very, very powerful, very limited dialogue. You could feel this conflict within, like, more than just the tears that she's having at the dinner table, but how she's like trying to avoid the conversation by keeping her attention focused on the fridge.
Yeah.
And she just won't turn around. She's trying to focus on other things to talk about. It's like that feeling of she knows that he knows and she's trying to avoid it just to be in denial of the situation. And then when she has to go to Henry, those scenes I thought were very powerful. Like everyone here is amazing, especially Greg Sestero. Like everyone here is top notch.
Well, and even the way they just draw that contrast, like that scene, that he understands, and then the very next scene when he's talking to his brother and like the rage and hatred, like it was a perfect two sides of a coin, because with your wife, like I was a part of it, like I was gone, like there was parts of this that I brought on myself, but also my relationship with my brothers is ruined forever.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a great array of nuances.
I love the kind of ambiguous ending that they have with Henry and Flora, because that's his daughter, biologically speaking. Yeah. But it doesn't seem like he'll ever get to the point where he will admit that out of respect. But he'll still get a chance to raise her, you know,
and be a part of her life.
Yeah, I think that was a really great touch. So yeah, everyone's great. The only things I have, most of my complaints are kind of chalked up into the first 4 episodes of just sometimes the horror felt a little bit tacked on, and like we need to have some scary stuff. We
gotta make people jump.
I had the feeling they really didn't care about to do some of the horror, but it was kind of pushed in there because they have to. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just the way it read. Yeah. And the final episode was a little bit too much of a let's wrap this shit up. Yeah. but within that there was still so much to love. So so that's pretty much my only complaints about it. Everything else, I'm not perturbed by the whole it's not as scary debacle.
No, and again, I really wish that that this type of horror, that gothic horror and gothic romances, would be more embraced within horror. Like it's a legitimate type of horror. Like horror doesn't have to be aggressive, bloody, and scary. It can sometimes just be chilling and somber. Horror, I think, explores the more anguished emotions of life, and there are a lot of those other than anger and flight. So yeah, I think that it's not really a problem at all to me. I think this is perfect for this time of year. It's a beautifully told, beautifully rendered, and wonderfully gothic story, and highly recommend.
All right, guys. Well, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. It's a show, so we can kind of go forever. You know?
We could talk about all this.
Some more in-depth ones, but, we didn't even do a non-spoiler for this. But thank you guys for the questions that you submitted. Wish we could do everyone's, but I kind of choose the questions that will allow us to sort of talk about most people's questions.
Choose the questions from people who are the better people.
No, you know what I mean. Because there's so many questions, and then sometimes they're more specific, but I'm like, but by answering this general question, I'll probably answer that more specific question.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully we covered everything.
Trying to just cover what everyone wants us to talk about in a sense, right? Thank you guys so much for being here. This was fun. What do you think about The Haunting of Bly Manor? How do you think it compares to Hill House? Is there one that you prefer? Let us know down below. Subscribe, click the notification bell. Last but not least, Eric Horstman.
Eric.
Saved you for this one, buddy.
This is the one.
Saved you for this one. You have been begging us to cover this show, and now here we are covering it. Main reason for you. This is not even a lie.
No one else watches this, but you will have done our job.
We put out Devil All the Time questions, and suddenly just... I was going to take a long time to sort through.
All these questions are Eric with different accounts.
To figure out.
There's a few questions. It's pretty simple to organize, but we still got an hour out of it.
But I love you, buddy. You're a wonderful person to talk to, man. Getting to talk to you the other day for an extended period of time was actually like, I really feel like we could have a real friendship in like outside of just internet connection if we ever lived in the same area or whenever we do see each other in person. I feel like we'd have a grand old time and have a lot of laughs and share a lot of the same philosophical beliefs on society and such. So, buddy, I love you. I hope you're being safe. Enjoy the next 12 rewatches of Haunting of Bly Manor.
Yeah, man. And if you want to come possess my body, you're welcome anytime.
Oh,
all right?
buddy.
That's the haunting I want. The Haunting of John Humphrey by Eric Horstman.
Oh.
Ooh.
Anyway, buddy, thank you so much
Love
for being
you.
here. Love you.
Love you.